Today, we're talking cars. This is Min Central Currents. I'm your host, Teresa Meese. The garage is heavy with the scent of oil, metal, and old leather. I'm sitting as far forward as possible in the driver's seat, short legs stretched out to reach the pedal in the middle, ears attentive for when my dad's voice yells, "Okay, now." I press the brake pedal down, standing on it a bit to make sure it reaches all the way to the bottom. I don't know that I'm helping bleed the brakes, but I do know that I'm helping my dad. Our dog sleeps on the passenger seat beside me, happy to just be in a car, moving or not. We're bundled into our station wagon, breath fogging the windows from all of us reciting, "St. Jude, make it work," as my mother turns the engine over, hoping we can get to Sunday morning Mass on time. This scene repeats over the years. There's a whole patchwork of summer days spent exploring pick-your-parts junkyards, finding abandoned treasures and scurrying wildlife among the warm grasses and wildflowers, handing Dad tools and helping him carry parts out. And then I start to drive. Our high school truck was a K5 Blazer that my brother bought for $150 from the Golden Spike Auto Yard and restored for his magnum opus 4-H project, earning a purple ribbon at the state fair and bestowing upon his younger sisters the coolest old truck we could ever hope to drive to and from school. It was also the most expensive truck to drive to and from school, so we typically rode the bus. But in those last days of the school year, you can bet we removed the old hardtop and cruised with our tape deck blaring. The first car I bought was a 1966 Volvo 122 S wagon. The S is for sport. It was a sweet little curvy car with 4 on the floor, a missing synchro into second, and an engine that sounded like a well-oiled sewing machine. It had flow-through ventilation in the floorboards and a missing firewall insulation pad on the driver's side that made it into a sauna during those summertime commutes. I once coasted it through the rain-flooded Lowry Tunnel by sheer willpower when halfway through, the water shorted out my electrical system. My dad talked me through an alternator swap over the phone as my car sat stuck in a store parking lot. And yes, I had a spare alternator on hand. I fell in love with and married a man who had studied auto repair and had his own full set of mechanics tools. That wasn't why I married him, but our mutual love for cars was definitely a part of the romance. We've owned businesses together over the years that require a truck, custom cabinetry, home repair, and just generally live lives that require having a vehicle on hand that has towing and hauling capability. I tell you all of this because today we're talking about cars. We're talking about trucks. We're talking about our relationship to these vehicles. My guest today is Jukka Kukkonen, an educator who is working to help the public integrate our love of and experience with our own vehicles, and what that experience will look like as the automotive industry continues to transition to fully electric-powered vehicles, or EVs as they're referred to throughout this episode. First, I'm going to let Jukka lay out his automotive credentials because they are definitely impressive, and he absolutely knows what he's talking about.
I grew up in a small town in eastern side of Finland, a little ways away from here. We had a small farm where we have 20 milking cows, a dairy farm there. And at that time, that was enough to make a living. We didn't live large, but it still was a great childhood that I had there. And I was always interested in technology. And so I was the guy whose garage was full of all kinds of funky things, mopeds, motorcycles, old cars, and all of that we rent there with my friends all the time. And I actually trained to become an automotive mechanic. So I worked as a mechanic first, and then I trained to become an automotive engineer. And I worked for Ford Motor Company in Finland. I was technical trainer for Ford, responsible of technical training in 4 countries, and then I was later an area manager for Ford, responsible of the dealership development in part of Finland. So I have an automotive background in that way. That's where I come from, technology. And then I moved away from automotive industry, went into consulting and training, met my wife through that way, and she of course is from Minnesota. So then when we decided to get married, we had to flip a coin if she's going to move to Finland or if I'm going to move to here. And I don't know who won there, but I've been here for the last 19 years. So that's how I ended up in Minnesota. Over the years, I was still keeping up with what's happening in automotive industry, and I started to see that electric vehicle technology is maturing in a way that it will become a viable option for us. And that's when I decided this time for me to get back to the automotive world and start working with electric cars. And that was over 10 years ago. So I've had my own company, shift to electric, for 10 years now. And I've looked into how the EV market develops, what's happening there, and where things are going. And I usually look at things first from technology standpoint, and that's why I decided that this makes sense. And then look at the market and so forth. And now my main job is to stay on top of what's happening in the market. I've worked quite a bit with charging infrastructure setups, figuring out what's the best ways to provide charging for apartment buildings, condominiums, workplaces, and other things like that. In 2012, we started the Minnesota EV Owners Group, which just provides a forum for EV owners to talk about it and others who are interested in EVs to talk with EV owners so that they can get really good information. And that has grown to become one of the biggest and most active regional EV owners groups in the US. We have over 2,000 members. And in a normal year, we do a lot of events where we just bring our cars and talk with people. That's the best way to really provide information about EVs, is when you hear it from owners directly. And then I also teach EV market and technologies at the University of St. Thomas. And I'm an EV market expert for Fresh Energy, that is clean energy advocacy organization in St. Paul.
During the course of our conversation, Jukka also touched on the very practical reason why auto manufacturers are moving towards electric-powered vehicles.
When I say that I see the EV technology maturing in a way that it will be our future, that is very clear now. When you look at it, even the auto manufacturers right now are moving their R&D dollars, all their development that they are doing. They are not developing internal combustion engine anymore. They are putting their money into electric vehicle drivetrains because they have realized that they are better. And that comes from a simple fact that internal combustion engine, we've used it for 100 years, and it has been developed over the years in many, many different ways. But the challenge is that the basic idea of internal combustion engine is that we are trying to capture the energy that is in chemical form in a gasoline and move it into mechanical form by using small explosions inside the engine. And anyone thinking about it can understand that is really hard to do. It's really hard to move that energy into mechanical form. And that's why internal combustion engines are only 15 to 25% efficient. There's a lot of losses, and most of those losses are heat losses. And someone has actually said that internal combustion engines are great heaters, and as a side product, we get some propulsion power out of them too, which I think describes it well, because most of the energy that you're putting in there actually turns into heat, which is not ideal. So that is a challenge we've had always with internal combustion engines, and you can't really solve that. It's a simple matter of physics. Whereas with EVs, you have electric motors that have one moving part, rotor. So those ones, again, those have been also improved over the last 100 years, and they are 85 to 95% efficient because what's easier to use the magnetics there to change the energy from electrical energy into the mechanical energy.
For all of our listeners who are visual thinkers and visual processors, I will add links to the show notes that explain the difference between how an internal combustion engine works versus how an electric drivetrain works, because I know that for me, I do a lot better when I get to see pictures. So don't worry, there will be pictures in the show notes. All right, back to Jukka.
That is the big difference between these two setups, and that's why electric motors will take over from internal combustion engines. What has slowed us down in this process has been the battery technology. That's the reason for decades EVs didn't move too much forward. Until last decade, we've seen really big improvements in battery technology, not just for cars, but for other uses too. But lithium-ion batteries, then if you look at the price, for example, they used to be over $1,000 per kilowatt hour. Now they are closing to $100 a kilowatt hour. So that's a huge development there. And for example, if GM would have built the Chevrolet Bolt in 2010, just the battery alone at that time would have cost about $70,000. 70. So that's a lot of money. Of course, you can make a small car economical that way. This year, for the same battery, probably cost them $7,000 to build. We are now reaching the point where EVs are competitive with the internal combustion engine cars because the battery prices have come down, and now it's easier to do. So that's if you think about very shortly, why we are seeing EVs coming to the market right now and why they will take over from internal combustion engine.
Well, Jukka, as part of the homework that you gave me for this episode, you told me that I should drive an EV. So I got a hold of my friend Bruce, and he very graciously let me drive his newer model Tesla. And I have to say that I was blown away by the experience. My normal vehicle is a 2008 Jeep Liberty. It's a standard transmission. I love driving. I love being in control when I'm driving. The experience with this Tesla was completely unexpected. It accelerated like nothing I've been in before. It handles so smoothly. It is that when they mention the fact that these vehicles are perfectly balanced and you can feel it when you drive, you really truly can feel it when you drive. I was not expecting that. So I had a lot of fun driving the vehicle. So I just wanted to let you know what my reaction was to the homework that you gave me.
That's very often the experience. People are hesitant about EVs until they drive one. And then when they drive one, they're like, hey, this is actually a great thing. Why was I so worried about this in the first place? And if you find people who are kind of against the idea of EVs, they usually haven't even driven one. Then when you drive one, you're like, wow, actually, this is better. And that is really important for everyone to have an opportunity to experience them. That's how you can actually make your own mind. It's really hard to make up your mind on something if you haven't experienced it. I understand people love their own old internal combustion engine. They love their V8s. Understand there are hobby cars. Great, keep the hobby cars. But then think about, do I have to drive with that drivetrain every day? Or should I maybe shift to driving electric, which actually saves me a lot of money, pollutes way less, and it's actually much more fun to drive. As you said, from acceleration points, they are really, really good. Even the simple Chevy Bolt that is a small family car goes from 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds. So they are awesome.
So once people decide that they're interested in accessing an EV, how do you find one for sale in the state of Minnesota?
Yeah, so that's the next step then. How can people experience these cars? If I say that they are great, that's one thing, but it doesn't mean anything to anyone if they can't go and try it themselves. They have to. That's why I'm always saying, don't believe me, just go and drive it yourself. Have fun, see what it's like, and enjoy it. So EV availability at Minnesota dealers has not been very good in the past. Part of it is because auto manufacturers themselves have been slow to move into this space. They have put a lot of effort in over the years in building internal combustion engines. They actually went so far that they were thinking about in strategic meetings in 80s and 90s and so forth, like what's our core competency in our company? What is the thing that we really is valuable in our company? And they said, well, we can outsource the brakes, we can outsource the suspension, we can outsource the electrical stuff, we can outsource this and that, but internal combustion engine is the one competitive advantage that we have. We should put all our efforts in making sure that we make the best internal combustion engines, and that's how we can compete. And that was true at that era. Now when electric drivetrain is replacing internal combustion engine, manufacturers are like, oh boy, we have bet on this horse, and this is the horse that is really hard to continue with. What are we going to do now? Okay, let's try to keep this going as far as we can, because we have invested so much money into it. At the same time, they started to kind of like figure out, okay, we have to start doing something on this one. So that's one thing that has really slowed us down, is how manufacturers had to make a slow movement to this new technology. Now we are starting to see that movement. GM has said that in 2035, they are not going to be selling any internal combustion engine cars anymore. Volvo has announced that they will be stop selling that in 2030 already. Volkswagen is putting a lot of effort into this one. They are saying that they will not be developing any new internal combustion engines after 2026. Jaguar has said that they'll stop selling internal combustion engines in 2025 already. And Ford has said that they will not sell internal combustion engine cars in Europe in 2030, and we're expecting to hear some more information about what their approach is in US very soon here, probably this month. They will be launching their new F-150 Lightning next week, actually. So check that out.
This was recorded before the Lightning launched, and it's airing 2 weeks post-launch. You can watch the launch video on YouTube at Ford's official YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the show notes.
You can also reserve it at the same time. I think it's this $100 down, and then you get bragging rights for having a reservation down for electric Ford F-150, which will be coming out next year. So that's the manufacturer side. Dealers, then of course, they follow what the manufacturers kind of put together. Manufacturers put together big strategies, then that kind of trickles down to the dealers. They are saying, okay, we are seeing this and this model coming up. Okay, this is how we should be moving. And of course, manufacturers haven't been pushing the new EVs into Minnesota market, and therefore we haven't seen too many yet. But that is definitely changing here now. And as a dealer, of course, you're a little concerned about it, like what's going to happen here. I have to start selling these EVs. Will this work? And yes, it will work. It will change the way the business is done a little bit, but it is a shift that is going to be happening. So I would say it's better to start early than wait till the last minute and go try to drag your feet as long as you can, because that will put you in competitive disadvantage. We are seeing it right now with Tesla, of course, being the only US manufacturer that only manufactures and sells electric cars. They have been, of course, kind of pushing the envelope and bringing EVs into the market and making really attractive, great cars overall. And they are now market leaders in many segments. They are market leaders in luxury sedans, for example. They are in EVs clear market leaders. For all EVs, they are over 60% of the EVs sold in the US are sold by Tesla. And other manufacturers are now understanding that if the shift is happening here, Tesla has that big of an advantage, it's not going to be very good for the other manufacturers.
Do you know how things are looking for towing capacity for these EVs?
Yeah, it depends on the EV, but many of them do have, which are many of the bigger ones, crossovers, SUVs, and then upcoming pickup trucks have towing capacity. And if I remember right, the cheap comparison, for example, was that it had similar, if not the same, towing capacity as the internal combustion engine model. EVs have a lot of power, there's no shortage of power. The other thing that they do have is that it's much easier to control the power, because with the electric drivetrain is if you just press the accelerator pedal a little bit, it just very slowly starts to creep forward. It's you can do that in internal combustion engine, but it's not as precise as it is with EVs. And if you think about something like Jeep, where you're doing a towing, you're doing a lot of things where you might have to do a precise movements with driving in challenging terrain. It is actually very interesting in how to drive that. So I'm looking forward to driving the Jeep and seeing the difference there. But towing capacity, yes, many of them have a good towing capacity.
So I understand from the owner's perspective that there is going to be a lot less maintenance required on EVs, but from the auto mechanic's perspective, there's still quite a number of parts that are swappable, replaceable. What does the future of the automotive mechanic career field look like?
There's a lot of common parts with these, but EVs in general do need much less maintenance. There's no question about it. If you have a full electric car, you don't have oil changes or any of that. When we look at the whole mechanics working on cars, first of all, warranty issues. Every car has some kind of warranty issues. So that's the thing. Warranty work still exists for these cars. You still need to replace tires for all of these. That's one thing. I would say to dealers, hey, make sure that you are very competitive in a tire business in your area, because that's a one big thing there. Same way, and then you need to do different kind of fixes when something goes south, suspension parts and other things over time. Yes, but again, overall, much less maintenance. At the same time, we have to understand that this shift will not happen overnight. No matter if we would start to sell 50% of the cars overnight now as EVs, it still would take a long time before we would be replacing all the internal combustion engine cars. So if you're an existing mechanic right now, I wouldn't worry about it at all. You still have plenty of work to do. But at the same time, if you are training to become a mechanic, I would say look into EV stuff too. There's a lot of need for diagnostics and other things, which is very important for any car nowadays. So become very good at that, and you have no problem. But overall, this will be a slow process, takes decades. I don't see a huge issue for mechanics in that way. But it will change.
So I'd like to ask about battery performance, especially in light of the extreme cold weather that we get in Minnesota. How are the batteries lasting on these newer model EVs?
EVs are actually really good cold weather cars, really good winter cars. The reason for that is that with traditional cars, when you think about, for example, cabin heat, you will start to get cabin heat when the internal combustion engine is warm. And that usually takes at least several minutes, if not longer, depending on how you're driving. With EVs, you don't have that waiting period because new ones have heat pump heating system. So when you go in a cold car, it actually starts heating it right away. So I tested it first time in 2016 with our Nissan Leaf, and we have a cold garage, and it was 16 degrees outside, so normal Minnesota winter day there. And I just went into our garage, reversed the car outside of garage, was waiting for the garage door to close, and I was like, why is the blower motor already running? And I put my hand in there, and there was lukewarm air coming out of the system. I had just reversed it outside of garage, and I had lukewarm air coming out of it already. I drove less than a block, and I have hot air coming from the system. And I was like, I have driven many cars over my lifetime, and I've never seen this kind of performance from any car ever. So now if there's a cold day and I have a parking lot full of cars, I'll definitely pick up one with the heat pump heating system, which is an EV, and drive that, because you don't have to wait for it to heat. You can also use preheating function with these cars, so that, for example, when my wife was driving to work and back with our EV, 7:20 in the morning, when she goes in the car is waiting her inside our cold garage, so that the interior is hot, her seat is hot, and even her steering wheel is hot. So it's pretty luxurious ride from there on. And you can do this in your
Yes.
garage, inside the garage and door closed, because there's no emissions. Don't try this at home with your internal combustion engine car. It doesn't work well.
Quick PSA. Due to the number of very, very unfortunate and sad deaths that took place in Texas this past winter when they had that electrical grid failure, we do want to make sure that people remember you cannot run your car inside a closed garage. You shouldn't run your car inside an open garage either. Make sure it's fully pulled out of the garage before you run it. Otherwise, the emissions can get into your home and cause carbon monoxide poisoning.
And then when she was at work and she wanted to leave home, she could just take her cell phone out and tell the car, could you please heat yourself up? And she could hop in a warm car and drive home.
Yeah, that alone is a huge selling point for me.
Yeah. And this is already available at the 2013 Nissan Leafs. And we bought one of those used 2 years ago for $7,500. So it's not like you have to pay $50,000 for some high-end car. No, these are available for you in a used EVs already. So that's one thing. They heat much faster. They are easier from that perspective. Then when we talk about the range, yes, in a cold weather you'll be using more energy, which is true for all cars. In EVs, because you had a shorter range, you can notice that more. So in 2013, 2014, 2015, when the cars had still 100 miles of range, you might lose 40 miles, 50 miles from that range in a really cold days. And as long as you're aware of it, that's fine. For example, my wife drove 35 miles to work and back, and she could still use our car. But nowadays, because the battery technology has developed, last year the average driving distance for EVs or range for EVs that were sold last year was over 250 miles. So if you lose 50, if you lose even 70 miles because of the cold weather, that's not much of an issue. As long as that's depending, of course, you're driving. So that has changed, because bigger batteries, you have a less of a drop in a cold days for those. And for those people who are really worried about range, if that's something they are concerned about, you can always choose plug-in hybrid. You can go with that Jeep Wrangler 4xe that has first miles every day, 20 first miles are electric, and after that it goes into hybrid mode, and you can drive as far as you want in a hybrid mode. So that's a good thing. But every day your first miles are electric. So if you drive usually 15 miles a day, you're electric. I've had friends who were driving the first generation Chevy Volts with the V that was plug-in hybrid. That has had about a little over 30 miles of range, and they could drive 8,000 to 9,000 miles before they put any gas in their tank, because usually they were just driving with electric. So it does help in that way too.
What's the availability of charging look like throughout Minnesota? Has that improved at all?
Well, charging is an interesting thing when we think about it. If first question we usually get when we talk with general public about the EVs is do we have enough public charging infrastructure? And my answer is yes, we have over 1,000 public charging stations already, so we have a decent coverage, and more coming all the time, especially for the DC fast charging stations around outstate Minnesota. There's more and more of those coming. But what we have to remember is that EVs are charged at home. So over 80% of the charging when we survey the EV owners happens at home. There's a little bit of workplace charging if workplace charging is available, and then some public charging, but it's only 5% of the charging. Because if you think about it, what's the easiest and most affordable way to power your driving? You just come home, you plug the car in, leave it there, let it charge. In the morning it's full, you unplug it and go. I say that it takes about 10 seconds to charge the car in my household, because it takes less than 5 seconds. I've timed it to plug the car in, and then in the morning unplug it. It charges sometime in the nighttime, and I'm sleeping at that time. It doesn't bother me at all. And that's how people are actually powering their cars. So the most important place for charging is at home, and I usually use the DC fast charging only if I drive long distances, and that's not very often. Especially last year, it wasn't very often, but still, I mean, maybe once or twice a month. Otherwise, it's charged at home.
Do you know if there's any builders who are really on board with this and already planning to make sure that there are charging spots available for apartment dwellers as well?
Yeah, there's more awareness on that right now, and we are working to educate people about it. When I talk with architects and developers right now, I'm telling them that if you're building something right now and you're not taking EV charging into account in your plans, you're building it wrong, period. Because then someone else has to go there a couple of years from now to figure it out, and it's much more expensive to retrofit it rather than if they originally would have included in their original plans. So that's a one thing. It's going to be quite a bit of education. Solutions don't necessarily have to be too complicated, especially if they are taken into account when they are building. When you have to retrofit, then the things start to cost more because you have to run conduit and you have to do all kinds of things, drill holes to the walls and increase your power, and that's that. But those are mostly, I mean, apartment building challenges, and that's a one thing. At home, if you have a single family home and you have your own garage or even a parking spot, things are much easier. You can start driving the car just by plugging it into normal 120 outlet. The car comes with the cord set, so you just get the car, drive home, plug it in your outlet, let it charge, and you're good to go. That works well if you drive less than 30 miles a day, because we are limited by how much power we can pull from that 120 outlet. If you drive more than that a day on average, then I would recommend installing 240 volt level 2 charging station. Those ones cost $500 to $600. And actually, many utility companies have programs where they might be providing that for lower fee when you sign up for their overnight charging. That is beneficial for the owners from two perspectives. First of all, you'll get a cheaper charging setup there that way because there's some incentive into it. And then you also get cheaper electricity price during the nighttime because utility companies want to make sure that you're charging during the nighttime when there's very little other loads on the grid. That's beneficial for them. And so you might get the electricity for half price during that time. And it's interesting when we start to do the calculations there. If you drive 1,000 miles a month, roughly, with average EV, you're paying the flat fee, that residential fees for electricity, your electricity will cost you about $40 a month. If you take advantage of that time of use rate, when your electricity fee might be half of that, you'll be paying maybe $20 a month for your driving. And then if you compare that to how much you're paying for your cell phone service every month, you realize that your driving doesn't cost you anything anymore. And that's the big thing, is that it's so much cheaper to drive these cars too, because again, they are so much more energy efficient. And the other thing, especially for rural areas, is that if you think about it, the money that you're paying then for your energy, for your driving, is actually going to your local utility company. It is staying in your local economy. It's not going to the oil companies that are not your local economy. That money is always drained outside of Minnesota, most of it. There's a little piece of it that stays in Minnesota, but much bigger portion it goes to the big oil companies outside of Minnesota. Why are we supporting those? Why aren't we supporting our local economy by buying the electricity for our local utility company, which is extremely happy to help us in doing all of that? So it's a really good booster for our local economy in that way, that first of all, you're paying less for it, you're saving more money, you can use that for some other uses, and then even the money goes to local utility company. So it's definitely a win-win for everyone.
In the Midwest here, it's not at all unusual to take long trips to go from one city to another, or to have a long commute that takes you an hour and a half, 2 hours round trip. What do the longer distances look like for EVs these days? Is that improving at all?
Yeah, that is changing quite rapidly right now because battery technology again developing. We have longer range EVs, so you can use them for longer trips too. What is happening at the same time when we have a longer range, that means that battery is bigger. And when batteries are bigger, they can actually accept faster charging speeds too. So then the fast charging speeds are increasing, and it takes shorter time to charge the car. We did a trip 2014 already with actually a Tesla Model S when Tesla had just opened up their supercharging network. So we were the first group to drive from Minnesota to Los Angeles, California, with using their supercharging network when they were just had a one route going there. Well, nowadays the whole country is full of supercharging stations, so there's quite a bit of those. And nowadays you can just, at that time we were using Excel spreadsheets to calculate everything, and nowadays you just tell the car, please navigate to Miami, and it calculates you the route, shows you where to go, shows where is the supercharging station where you should stop, what time do you arrive there, like 17:32 you will arrive at this supercharging station, you should stay there for 32 minutes to charge your car, and then you can continue. And that's how the thing is just getting more sophisticated and better. And this is true for any car. Tesla has been leading this one, but other cars are following. And that's what it usually is now, is you drive for a couple of hours somewhere, and then you stop for 30. It used to be 30 to 40 minutes, but it starts to be 20 to 30 minutes now, more the stop time. And we, for example, drove to Grand Marais last summer, and we started from Twin Cities, drove to Duluth, plugged our car in there for supercharging, and then went to find something to eat. We found a nice pizza place where we got some pizza, ate there, came back to car. It took us about 40 minutes to do that. And the car was already ready, waiting for us there. So it usually takes longer for me to fuel myself than for the car to fuel itself on these long trips. So that's kind of how I see it. So then we continued from Grand Marais from there. So it's a one-stop strategy from Twin Cities to Grand Marais, for example. And that's what I would expect to do with the internal combustion engine car too. So it's becoming a very comparable in that way. Still needs more development. Things are working forward, but it's fun to be part of it and see how all the develops in this space.
Would you like to wrap up by telling our listeners where they can find resources provided by you online about what it looks like for consumers to find and purchase electric vehicles?
Yeah, I would say that those who are looking into EVs or considering just playing around with the idea, we are just building a new site that is called mnevbuyer.com. So if you go to mnevbuyer, that provides you all the basic information about charging, about economics, how does it compare, availability of vehicles, where you can find them, connections to utility companies. That's always what I would like to highlight, is talk with your local utility companies, see how they can help you in all of this. So that's kind of the tool that I would like to provide people is go there. We are kind of gathering everything there. So mnevbuyer.com.
Thanks again to Jukka for taking the time to have this conversation with me about the incredible innovation in automotive technology that is making its way to the mass market, so the rest of us consumers can now benefit from and enjoy what has come from these past couple decades of experimentation and market growth. Now, speaking of market growth, at the time of this episode release, the Minnesota State Legislature is still entangled in a fight over the Clean Cars rule. At risk is the renewal of regular environmental funding that goes to the Minnesota Zoo, the Science Museum, and our state park system. A short explainer. The Clean Cars rule is aimed at making electric vehicles more available for sale throughout the state, both to meet demand in more regions outside of major markets like the Twin Cities, and to keep the money folks are spending on electric vehicles in the local economies there. Plus, of course, the very real environmental benefits of having more electric vehicles on the road. Under the rule, EVs would need to make up between 6 and 7% of vehicle sales in Minnesota between 2025 and 2034. Earlier this month, a judge concluded that the proposed rulemaking from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is needed and reasonable, and that the agency has the authority to adopt the changes. But Senate Republicans, led by Senator Ingebrigtsen of Alexandria, are saying they will not pass major funding for much of the environmental arm of the state unless the Clean Cars rule is tabled, which will cause state parks to close in July, ahead of the busy 4th of July weekend. And, as I said, greatly impact the operating budgets of the Minnesota Zoo and the Science Museum, as well as many other of our environmental agencies. So, if you have plans to get out and enjoy all that Minnesota has to offer this summer, call your state senators and Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka. Let them know that there is, in fact, growing demand for electric vehicles in our state. In the past year alone, Minnesota's number of registered electric vehicles rose by 44% in 1 year. Car manufacturers are already planning to switch to electric themselves. It would be nice if that opportunity was afforded to more folks in greater Minnesota as well. This episode was developed and managed by Bruce Anderson. Production by Riverside Productions, LLC. Music by Epidemic Sound. Contact us with your questions and comments at mincentralcurrents@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube by searching Min Central Currents. Till next week.